Hello, BookTube, and welcome to my channel, The Ansible Library. Just started this channel as sort of a project of my own to discuss and talk about some of the books I've been reading this year and share some of my thoughts with them. I mainly read just science fiction, some fantasy, some other genres there, but mostly science fiction books. I really sort of sunk my teeth into the science fiction genre here in the last couple years, and I just wanted to sort of see what happens as I start this channel out. I'm going to be strictly reviewing books that I still currently own copies of. There's some books I did audiobooks of or read digitally through Libby apps and from libraries and such, but I'm just going to strictly stick with the books that I have the physical copies of, and maybe at the end of the year, we'll see. I'll do sort of a ranking of everything I've read this year, but just wanted to try my hand at some of these and play with the format a bit, see what works, see what doesn't, but just wanted to jump straight in. First book I read this year was A Time of Changes by Robert Silverberg. This was the first full novel by Robert Silverberg I've read. I've read some of his short stories before, but this was the first one, and just figured I'd start with the science fiction masterwork. I've got a lot of his other stuff that I'm roaring to read because I like this book a lot. Basic premises: mankind spread through the stars, different planets, different cultures, and we meet our main character sort of writing this book as autobiographical, sort of his experiences on this planet, where it's forbidden to refer to yourself in the first person or share emotions with anybody. Everything has to be sort of third person, and it's really big taboo to to say I am me, and it's written from the perspective of the one main character who was a prince of a main continent, but when his father dies, he puts himself sort of into self-exile, so there wouldn't be any, trouble from his older brothers for taking over the throne or anything, and it's just sort of his journey through his exile and coming to terms with his new lot in life and realizing the fallacies in sort of the culture and coming to grips with being an individual and what that means in a world where an individuality is forbidden. Of course, he meets an Earthman who shares a drug with him that breaks all barriers between people and link your mind with the person on the drug with you, and so it's a complete tear down of the walls of individuality, and you're sharing your innermost thoughts and feelings with this individual, and he sort of starts a revolution, or tries to start a revolution, to share this drug with the world and tear down the walls of what society has put up. It got kind of tedious at first reading the story. Everyone, the dialogue between people, since they can't refer to themselves in the first person or as an individual, it was a lot of oneself and these general terms, and it took a minute to sort of get used to that, but then it flowed pretty nicely. He wrote it really well, and it just sort of became second nature to sort of read these interactions with people in it. There's this main plot point. One of the main reasons he's doing this is he's in love with his Bond sister, I think they're called. It's been a long time since I've read these books, so I'm just going off of sort of my general memory. It's not stepsister, not like related by marriage or anything like that. It's sort of every prominent house in the world shares a Bond sister, Bond brother with other prominent houses to create this like connection between everybody. And the Bond siblings are the only people you can really share your thoughts and feelings with. And he falls in love with his Bond sister, and there's this big plot about him eventually marrying this girl's cousin that looked identical to her, and him wanting to be with her, and it got a little icky at some times. It is important to his journey, his character development, and the reasons he does the things he does. I like the ending. I just sort of like the general world building and everything. Since I've only read some of his short stories before for Silverberg, He did a lot of great stuff with the short story form. So me sinking my teeth into something longer, full novel size, he was really able to flesh it out and make the world feel like a real livable, real live place. And it was a good read. I can't wait to check out some of his other stuff. Next book I read this year was The Chronicles of Amber, Volume 1 by Robert Zelazny. And this volume contains the first two books of the Amber series, Nine Princes in Amber and Guns of Avalon. And I really like this. I really like the first one a lot, Nine Princes in Amber. This was my first, again, full novel that I read by Robert Zelazny, and I really liked sort of how you're just jump right into the action. It starts out the main character, Corwell. He wakes up, has no memory in a hospital in New York, I think, and sort of you're right there with him. He has no idea what's going on, and immediately things start happening. Balls start rolling. He meets people, and he's just got to try to figure out what's going on, who these people are, how they know him, what his relationship to him is. You find out, he is one of the princes of Amber, where Amber is sort of the central world to this multidimensional universe where they call all these other sort of dimensions shadows, and our Earth as we know it is just a shadow of Amber. And these princes of Amber, they're able to freely walk through the different shadows and different dimensions of the universe and the world. And he makes his way back to Amber, where, he finds out his father's missing from the throne. So it's sort of this classic struggle between siblings dynamic of who's going to take the rightful place, backstabbing, plotting, stuff like that. And I really enjoyed it. It moved along pretty good. It wasn't, they're not that big of novels to begin with. Had a solid ending that was definitely cliffhangery, and so it was beneficial being able to read them all so close together. Picking up right into Guns of Avalon, it just picks up exactly where it left off. Amber gunpowder doesn't work. It's an inert substance for some reason in Amber. So a lot of the fighting and everything before was classic swords and arrows and naval battles and boarding ships and, hunting through the woods and stuff like that, and felt really sort of fantasy, but with this sort of sci-fi element of the different dimensions and being able to traverse the universe and stuff like that. But Corwell knows of one place where there's a substance that acts as gunpowder that still works in Amber. And of course, it's in Avalon, as in King Arthur's Avalon. Sort of slowed down a bit, it felt, after the high speed of the first one in the middle there, having to sort of build up the general plot, overarching plot of what the whole series was going to be about. I did, later on in the year, I finished the rest of the first 5 in the next volume. So discuss that later. But yeah, it was a good go. I liked Zelazny a lot and can't wait to keep reading more of his stuff. All right, a little backstory on this next one that I read in the year. I started pretty much reading as a child, reading all the expanded universe books for Star Wars, as the legend books as they're known now since Disney took over. And I owned pretty much every single one of them and would read them over and over and over again. And that was what got me into reading. That's what got me into sort of science fiction. But it was mostly strictly Star Wars that I read. And I hadn't read any of them in such a long time. And I sort of started busting them out last year and pick up one every now and then, and sort of been reading them chronologically again as I went through. So the next book I read in the year was Star Wars I, Jedi by Michael A. Stackpole. And this happens to be, it was one of my favorite growing up. I'm not going to go, there's so much history and lore and interconnectivity of stories and stuff for all the expanded universe stories. So talking about the plot is going to be pretty difficult as a standalone thing, but it follows main character from another series of Star Wars books, the X-Wing series of Corran Horn. It's the main character, but This story, it runs parallel to another Star Wars trilogy of books, the Jedi Academy trilogy by Kevin J. Anderson, I believe. I like this book a lot more than even that trilogy because it was not from the perspective of, Luke, Han, and Leia, and it wasn't focused on them. Yes, they're in it for a brief period of the book because, as I said, it runs parallel to that other trilogy, and so Luke Skywalker is a pretty big part of this one. But it wasn't solely focused on them. They were sort of like background characters, and it was very much from a single perspective, which is rare in Star Wars books. They jump around a lot between a lot of different characters, but you pretty much are with Cornhorn the whole time, and it's more of a detective story than anything. He's looking for his wife who got kidnapped by pirates, and he's going undercover. And yes, he's learning to be a Jedi and stuff at the same time. So there's all the same, lightsabers, space battles, action of that sort, but it's still, a detective story, and it just felt like a solid story and something different than what you're used to from the Star Wars books. It is a solid book. It's just as nostalgia and everything. It was a great read. I really enjoyed reading it, picking it up again. So yeah, I'd say check it out if you're interested in sort of any of that stuff. All right, next up that I read this year was A Case of Conscience by James Blish. First Blish I've read. You have a lot of his other stuff as well. I've read some of his other stuff since reading this one, and I'm really enjoying him as a writer, and this was my first sort of taste at Blish, and I wasn't let down. It's a different kind of read in the sense that religion is pretty heavy in the story. It's about this Jesuit Father Ramon, who's part of this scientist team, four-man team that is on this alien planet where there is this group of intelligent lizard-like people. Their job is to study the planet, study the race of beings living on the planet, seeing if it's feasible and ethical to sort of open the planet to the rest of mankind. The reason religion is sort of a big part of this plot and the story is because Father Ramon struggles with this dilemma of these alien race of lizards have no sense of good and evil. Everything is cold, hard logic by them, but they are completely moral. How can a race be so moral without knowing God, I think, is sort of what he's struggling to determine. And the sort of two parts in the book. I think it was written as two novellas and sort of mashed together as a novel form. And the first part is really good. It's when the scientists are on the planet sort of discussing their ideals and theories on the planet and the race, and there's not a lot of heavy metals on the planet, so they've sort of the alien race has advanced technologically in other ways because the only metals on the planet come from meteorite strikes, pretty much. But it was enjoyable sort of reading his ideas on a culture and a race how it would develop in this way without metals for engines or batteries, or even a compass was sort of unknown to them, I think. And so the first half was pretty interesting, pretty good. The second half, the team goes back to Earth. A lot of people don't like the second part as much, I feel, but I enjoyed it a lot. It was a sort of a unique perspective on what Earth would be like in the future. All the cities are these huge underground mega city sort of bunkers. The threat of nuclear war, made everyone so fearful that they built these giant underground cities. And even after the threat passed, they were so in-ground and developed underground that they just sort of stayed there. So the surface has kind of been, it's not abandoned, but, majority of the population lives under the ground in these cities. And it was a cool idea. And Father Ramon is given a gift of an egg of one of these lizard friends to take back and to Earth so that this alien can grow up with humanity. And the way these creatures work, when they reproduce and are born, they have all the knowledge and memories of their father or of their parents. It's built into their DNA. And so this alien grows up on Earth And it's just sort of, how does a race that has perfect morality handle being in an amoral world? This ending of the book caught me off guard. It was really good. It was pretty surprising, but it was, I don't want to say what it is because it's a great ending. And yeah, I like in Blish what he's doing. So can't wait to keep reading some of his stuff. And next up that I read this year was the first of the Xanth series by Piers, Spell for Chameleon. At the time when I read it, I had just the individual novel of Spell for Chameleon, but since then, I found this awesome hardcover collection of the first 3 Xanth books, so Spell for Chameleon, Source of Magic, and Castle Rugna. I've only read the first, The Spell for Chameleon, so far, but I love this collection here. I went through a period, I was reading a bunch of fantasy, but I got fantasied out. Every fantasy book sort of was starting to feel the same, sort of the same plot points of, there's unassuming boy in village who finds out he's important and has to go on a grand mission to do something. Like, I just felt like that story was told again and again and again, and nothing felt new to me. And so I didn't have a lot of high hopes with Spell for Chameleon. It's about this boy Bink, who lives on this magical island of Xanth, which is a part of the real world, but is sort of invisible and moves around. But he lives on this magical island where everything is magic, and he's the only person on the island who doesn't have magic, or seems like he doesn't have magic, and nothing he does gives him magic. So, and he goes on this sort of quest to find a wizard. So I didn't know. I didn't think I was going to like it, but I love this book. I loved it because this is the most magical world I've experienced so far, where every inch of this island and every aspect of it, of everyone's life, is so heavily influenced on magic that people don't even know don't know how to make bread or grow wheat, because there's a magical bread tree and there's a blanket tree, and everything magic so permeates every aspect of the world that it was just a lot of fun to read, to see what he was doing in this, what Piers was going, where he was going with this. And yeah, the cliches of Bink has no magic, but using his brains and his wits and his smarts, he's able to survive and go on this trip. It didn't feel so repetitive from the other, and so it felt fresh from all the other sort of fantasy stories I read. I don't even know how many books are in the Xanth series, but I definitely will read these first 3 because I've got them in this sweet book, and hopefully I get the same good feelings from the other ones. I know nothing about any of them, if it continues on Bink's story and all of that, but yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by it, and I'm happy to read some more of it. The next book I read this year was Academ's Fury by Jim Butcher. And I didn't read them all together, but I read them pretty close together, and I just feel like I gotta do the whole rest of the series at the same time reviewing them, because since I read these at the start of the year and I read them all so close together, everything sort of blends. Everyone in the world has control of an elemental fury, and it's sort of a part of them. It's a partner. It helps them in their life, and it's the 5. I think it's fire, water, air, earth, and steel. I didn't know. Once again, it was that same fantasy trope that I was just talking about, Spell for Chameleon, where main character Tavi, he is a boy in this world that has no furies, has no connection to any of these elemental creatures that sort of bond with somebody, and he's the only one. But hey, he's super smart, super clever. He can think his way through the problems he finds them in, and Furies be damned. You don't need special powers to be special, you know. Nothing wrong with that message. It's just it's the same over and over and over, it feels like. And so reading the first one, Furies of Calderon, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't think I would like it again. The world building was really good. Jim Butcher, he does very good things at creating this world and creating the peril in it. It takes off running, and it doesn't really slow down for the whole series, pretty much. But it just felt like every book was a repeat of the previous books. You know, it was Tavi finds himself in a situation, outnumbered, with no resources or no abilities, and yet he's got to outsmart and save the day. And it was really fun, and it was really good to read, and I enjoyed it, and that's why I powered through and I did the series all pretty close together, because it is an amazing world that he built, and the rules of the world are really well established. And yes, the stakes in each book get higher and higher, but it did just feel like it had to have been detrimental to it to read them all so close together, because it was very much fresh in my mind that this feels almost like the last book, just slightly more higher stakes. The whole reason I kept deciding to want to read the rest of the series was because just one part of that first book, it piqued my interest enough, and I didn't think anything of it. I thought it was just going to be sort of this throwaway, scenario that Tavi has to best, and that was it. It captured my attention enough that I had to look up. I just want to learn more about the Vord, see a picture of them or something, see what other people think they look like. But reading about them, I was like, oh, that's a unique idea. That this is very much a fantasy swords and sorcery series, but the Vord, to how I understood them at the time, was this invading alien species. And I was like, that's a cool thought of sort of this high fantasy stories with an alien invasion. And how would, a society in a world where they have these magical furies and magical elemental creatures that help them, how would they fight off an invading horde? So that's what I thought was going to be happening. And yes, that is what it is about, but it wasn't exactly how I'd pictured it in my head at the time. But it made me want to keep reading. It made me want to keep going to the next book, even though they blended all together so much. And the things that were supposed to be surprising and big revelations, yeah, I kind of saw coming a mile away. Like, you could tell sort of the progress of Tavi's story just from the titles of the books 2 through 6 or whatever, where it's Academ's Fury, Cursor's Fury, Captain's Fury, Princeps Fury, and First Lord's Fury. So, I mean, that's not a big spoiler when it's the title, but that's sort of his growth and progression through it. And he does, there's plot points and threads that are woven throughout the whole series that, ties back into the first book and second book that do get resolved, and they get resolved nicely. And I was happy with the way they were resolved without being cliche. I'd recommend reading them. He is great at what he does, Jim Butcher, and it was a lot of fun. But I'd recommend taking more of your time with it and giving it time to breathe. All right, everybody, thanks for checking out this first video. That was just the first 11 books that I read this year. Thanks for checking me out. Let me know in comments sort of your thoughts and opinions on some of the things, if you agree or disagree, or anything like that with my thoughts on some of these books, or recommendations for other books. I got a huge backlog of books that I'm I got to get through. I'm trying to, read the heavy hitters, the big hits of the science fiction genre to start and figure out what I like, what I don't like, and just work my way through it. So thanks for joining once again, and hopefully see you next time. Bye.